Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I was excited to welcome Steve Fader. Steve is someone whom I have become friends with recently, and we have shared some very deep, honest, and raw conversations. Steve is an entrepreneur at heart, but most of all, he is a man who has gone through his hero's journey and has come back to support others and guide them through their journey. The hero's journey has become a theme for me, especially on this podcast, and I have covered various aspects of it in previous episodes, such as rites of passage and atonement. For Steve, it started with the work ethic instilled in him as a young child. Although highly traumatic, it built him into the man he is today. The lessons about the world he learned through this upbringing were rooted in the fact that the world was not easy. If he wanted more, he would have to fight for it. Throughout the first 30 years of his life, he realized how difficult the world could be to navigate alone. And he chose to make sure he developed into the type of man that would not allow circumstances to dictate his future happiness and success. He also learned that success isn't as simple as hard work. Many times he worked hard and achieved nothing but physical and mental anguish. He realized that if he wanted more, he needed to change many aspects of the way he saw the world and build on how he was brought up. The foundation was cracked and stressed, but not irreparable. And proper discipline and hard work through personal development was going to be key. There's no growth without change. Upon achieving success, be it through learning from failure or an actual successful endeavor, it dawned on him that he was here to help people realize that they could also achieve what they wanted. The elevator back down analogy describes trying to elevate the people around you. In martial arts, the saying was, iron sharpens iron, which he still tries to live by today. If he can manage his way to the level of success he has achieved, he can perhaps help others realize their potential. That is something that, over time, has become a big focus of his, for better or worse. Over the years, he realized that not everyone wants or is prepared to succeed. He believes that success and failure are equally as substantial. Either of these things can change who you are, for better or worse. Now, Steve tries his best to put good into the world and works hard to provide for himself and his wife. He ensures his wife, his closest and strongest supporter, is protected and provided with the life most people dream of. He always continues the journey of personal development, as it is the only way he can succeed and continue to have the chance to effect change in the world. Respect and loyalty are two of the main drivers of his intention. He believes that everyone deserves both until they prove they do not. He stays on the journey to succeed and help others succeed because he would like to see as many people as he can become happy in his life. He feels that building an army of successful men with the same ability to effect positive change in the world is part of his calling. He was told he was a monster for so long that he began to believe those things and quickly realized that this might be true to a certain extent. But now, as a monster, he owes himself to control and direct that aspect of his personality for good and not evil. Many times in his life, circumstances could have played out differently. He chose a different path at several pivotal times in his life, and those choices led him down to the road he rides now. I really hope you enjoy this episode. It was an honor for me to record it, and if at the end you could leave a 5-star review, I would truly appreciate it. All right, Steve, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for coming on here. I've really appreciated the conversations we've had over the last little while here. We met recently as well, so it's funny how the universe makes things happen, but I'm super grateful for you to take the time today and join me. But before we get started and go into our conversation, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself so the listeners kind of get to know who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, well, thank you. Likewise. He said it's interesting how the universe just kind of puts stuff in front of you at the time that you need it. And I would say that the time in this particular case is unique, to say the least.
Yeah.
I am, my name is Steve Bader. I originally from Manitoba. I am a 44-year-old entrepreneur. I have been an entrepreneur for roughly around 20 years. I, as the case with most young males, straight out of high school, not a real plan for what I was going to do. So I jumped into a lot of different labor positions, which ultimately led me to the realization that I didn't really want to work for anybody else. So I had a tough time with authority, and I didn't like getting told what to do. Figure out kind of a way to survive and make money still. So, I worked some odd jobs through my early 20s and mid 20s. And then when I was about 26 or 27 years old, I met a woman that I dated at the time that was kind of savvy in website stuff. And I had never done like anything like that before. So she walked me through the process on how to build like a very rudimentary business. And I have a very creative nature just in general. And the first business that I started was I always skip over the very first one because it's kind of weird, but so this girl had this thing that she wanted to do with the local girls here in Calgary. She wanted to do like a calendar. She always would see like back in the early or mid 2000s, it was like a calendar push. So you'd have like microfunders and sell a calendar, it's like a charity, whatever. So she had the same idea. She wanted to do this like local girls because she thought, Calgary's got some beautiful women. So I was like, cool, whatever, like let's do it. So she was a photographer as well, took a bunch of pictures, and then we consolidated everything into this like calendar platform. So the first time I had ever done any kind of organizational stuff by way of trying to build a business. So that's the actual first business I participated in. But shortly thereafter, that was a huge failure, by the way. Invested like $5,000 or $7,000 in the printing of these calendars. And then the model was go out, pound the pavement, go to bars, local stuff like that. We got some corporate sponsorship, like the radio station here in Calgary. CJ90 was a big sponsor, and they had done a calendar every year. So I had pitched them just out of the blue on this idea that they would use our calendar as their 50th anniversary calendar, which they did, but it was a huge failure for whatever reason. I mean, it just didn't, but it was a good learning experience.
Yeah.
But shortly thereafter, I started a merchandising company. So I had been training in mixed martial arts and Muay Thai for, the majority of my teens and the majority of my 20s. I ultimately ended up fighting a few fights in mixed martial arts professionally. But as part of that kind of world, the second business that I started was a merchandising company. So at the time, the UFC was really big or starting to grow in popularity. And there was a local kind of popular brand called Capo. So I thought, we can take a version of our own and create it. So I ended up creating a brand. Again, it was a huge learning experience. Lots of failures, lots of money spent. And then ultimately ended up kind of, moving forward through a couple more businesses to today, where I am now the largest shareholder and a board member of a publicly traded company that is in the consumer packaged goods space in the United States. We've got roughly 400 employees in 6 different states. So it's been an interesting evolution for the last, 15 or 20 years by way of entrepreneurial career.
Right.
Without getting into too much like extreme detail or excruciatingly painful stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of failures along the way, and it's ultimately allowed me to be able to attain what I have today. And I certainly don't think that this is the end by any means. I feel oftentimes every day like it's only just the beginning. So kind of exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And again, I appreciate that journey. But I guess the first question that comes to mind anytime I hear people working their way through failure, I'm always curious because everyone has a different mindset and approach when they approach adversity or they face adversity for that matter. In your case, what kept you going despite, as you mentioned, those early failures? Like, what was it that you believed in yourself and what allowed you to keep moving forward with this mindset?
Yeah, great question. I've been thinking about this a lot, man, specifically since I met you a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
The exposure that I've got to the guys in your group has kind of forced me into reflecting on a lot of things that I had not in the past and asking myself some cool questions. how did I do it? Why did I do it? And I really feel like, obviously, when you're in the moment, you don't really think about that. I feel like, rewind 24 years old, the things that were driving me at that point in time were, survival, make money, trying to attain some type of accomplishment. The driver for me was trying to help people. And
Right.
so I grew up on a farm. So if you go even further back, I feel like this is where it actually came from. The work ethic that was instilled in me by my mother, I would say, was probably the most valuable thing that I kind of built foundationally, because it allowed me to be able to take, the situation where I'm necessarily not so smart, or I'm not so educated, or, you know what I mean? You don't necessarily, you're not book smart, but you've got the ability to work with your hands,
Right.
and do things that can help you survive. Right. So I always knew in the back of my mind, funny, I had this conversation with my wife last night, actually. I always knew that if I wanted to turn on the job security at any point in time, I could just make the decision to do it, because there really wasn't like to do. And I'm grateful for even having the physical ability to be able to work hard and help myself kind of get ahead. Um,
Yeah.
I would say that like the work ethic and the survival thing was probably the most significant. And I think that came from, the situation that we were in growing up. So my parents were divorced really young. My mother emergency services, so I got to see that. She worked shift work, so it was 12-hour shifts. So, there's a lot of times where she wasn't there, and it forced me into a position of responsibility, really. And I think that was good for what was to come in the future, and unbeknownst to me at the time. But, it allowed me to be able to adapt the way I think and adapt the way I learn things, learn very quickly. If I need to jump into something and it's, sink or swim, generally
Right.
figure out how to swim.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a roundabout way of answering that question.
Yeah. No, I definitely appreciate that. I think that's important. If I were to look back on myself, my parents were immigrants to this country, and seeing their work ethic also inspired me. So I remember when things would get tough, I kind of pulled back on those memories of watching my parents grind it out. So I think there's something to be said about that. So I can definitely relate. The other thing, you've shared with me is you you're part of this whole movement around, and you're also a donor for a men's movement that focuses on domestic violence. Why is that something you're passionate about, and why do you feel that is a cause you want to give back to?
Um, this would be a little bit of a longer explanation, but again, back to the comment that made about my parents getting when I was younger. I think that, obviously in your formative years, you learn certain things about life. And at that point in time, I got to learn about violence. So there's violence within the family. And even remembering it now, I remember it in pieces, and I mostly remember the things that were told and not necessarily the actual experience. So, for whatever, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's something else. That's kind of where it started. Like we've spoken about in the past, anger was treated a certain way just specifically because of that. And I think that, not to take sides in the divorce or anything, but I feel like, later in life now I can see that both of my parents had their own situation going on at the time, and I understand how things went down. And I don't necessarily agree with how the viewpoints coming out of that were communicated to us as kids. And it really dawned on me until later. I'm in my mid-20s, and I'm into a personal relationship that ultimately ended up with a domestic abuse situation. So specifically in this case, I was with a woman who, I don't know if she had a substance abuse problem, but she certainly was drunk at the time that this took place. And she came to my home. We were not living together, we were dating. She came to my home drunk after the bar one night and kicked in. I lived in a basement suite. So she kicked in the windows in the house, trying to get into the house. And I ended up like walking across the main bedroom, and I had at the time like a little flip phone, like a little tiny testing phone. And so I had my phone with me because she kept calling my phone. So I had it on the bedside table. She kicked the window in, and I was freaking out because I didn't know what was happening. And I grabbed the phone off the bed, went to the other side of the room and flicked the light on. And then I could hear her screaming. And for whatever reason, I threw the phone like at the window. I'm sure I was probably just trying to be aggressive or not handle the situation properly. The phone went through the broken glass, and I shouldn't laugh. It hit her in the lip. And she like meltdown, drunk, injured
Yeah.
now. Anyways, I left the situation because I realized that this doesn't look good. The police arrived. The story was told as if I punched her in the face. It didn't happen. And then, what took place in the years after that, I got to experience how the system sees situations like that. And I had no idea, no prior experience to that personally, specifically at that level. But what I did learn through that process was the system was very heavy on the support of the female, and it should be in a lot of cases. But there are cases, like in my case, where obviously the story's not told correctly. It kind of resonated with me, not at the point at which she would lie to the police, because I mean, that's not surprising to me, but what really hit home for me was immediately after it happened, the day after, she called my mother. And at that point in time, my mother and I had left home at 16. She had remarried, fantastic guy. They're still together now, like a very positive influence in my life. She didn't, then it was, but anyway, so we didn't have a real solid relationship from age 16 to, let's say 2006, 8, like 24, I would have been around 24 when this happened. I'm guessing. I'm not understanding. So she communicated to my mother her version of what had taken place. And instead of speaking to me, my mother messaged me and just basically told me I was right about everything, just like your father. I never want to speak to you again, like this type. And then at that point, I was like, wait a second, that happened real quick and no one really listened to my side of the story. So at that point in time, I hired a private investigator, and I had him seek out my father, who I had not spoken since I was 7 years. So we're talking about, it's a significant amount of time. Right. Now that I see about 2007, it took me probably like a year and a half to find out where he was. So at the point where, the guy gave me the information, I contacted him. We had a conversation about, first of all, it was like a reunion. So when I told him who it was, he burst into tears. He was driving at the time. He took a call on his cell phone. He's a truck driver, been a truck driver since I like. So, we kind of got over the first little bit, and then I told him, listen, I want to meet you in person. So within a week, I had driven of all places he lived in with Pascagoula, and he's lived here since I moved to Alberta. He's lived here since 1999. So we're like 2 hours away from each other and had no idea. But the questions that I asked him straight away were very to the point, like, did you do this? Things that my mother had told me. Did you do this? Did you do this? Did this happen? And the way he broke down and the way he received it, I mean, it should be also mentioned that, he's, in my opinion, extremely overweight. He doesn't take care of his body. The truck driver career is not necessarily one that I've chosen. He's not this monster or this, this failure that, had been described to me in the past. But the point of it is that when I met him and I got to feel his side of the story, not just listen to what he was saying, but emotionally, you could tell that, he was invested in me. I don't get the vibe like he's lying to me, right? So the truth finally came out about, the history of their relationship. And once I started to look at that, can I swear?
Oh yeah. You can do whatever you want.
It was like, fuck me. Like I've had this viewpoint about women my whole entire life, was that 10, 8, that was a long time. If you go through a couple person relationship, this one was the first one that had ever ended in something like this. Like it was escalated quickly and I didn't know how to handle it. I'm also I find myself in this legal situation and I'm like, what the fuck just happened? And so it started to shine a light on two sides to every story. You certainly can't make decisions based on, what one person is just saying versus what, collecting all the information might end up providing for you. So it was a whole process, we're talking years that I finally started to realize the system might be broken. It didn't really get driven home until the next relationship. So, and we talked about this in the past. because of the situation with what took place with the first woman in the domestic situation, I was actually brought up on charges. And generally, they've got proof and you have charges like drawn against you.
Yeah.
There's some type of a record. In my case specifically, they charged me, but didn't give me any type of like punishment. They just, there was this air in the courtroom where the judge at the time kind of felt like she was putting it on a little bit. And I certainly wasn't in a place to be like, oh, she's lying. You know what I mean? So I told my side of the story and she told her side of the story. And the judge kind of like, my lawyer told me after, it was almost like the judge was compelled to do something because of the situation and how how it looked just like on paper. Anyways. So after that, I found it necessary to divulge this information to any future personal relationships. And, whether that's a mistake or not, I feel like the type of personality that I've got is very transparent. And when it comes to personal relationships, I don't want to hide something like that from somebody, especially when I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
And so that what that did is, because I was continuously making the decisions to, and I didn't see it at the time, but I see it now, choose the same type of woman, which ended up, in my opinion, again, ultimately being the blueprint of my mother.
Right.
And it was just a mistake that I made over and over again until I ultimately, I met, my wife, it's a complete 180 to everything else I've done in my life. This is fantastic. Yeah. But yeah, so in one of the relationship after this incident, it happened again. And in this case, far more blatant and far more directed at, hey, I'm going to take advantage of this situation. In that situation, there was no interaction physically, like nothing bad happened. She just ran out of the house one day and called the police because we were arguing about something stupid, like going to the gym or something. Right. Used it as kind of like a tool. It should be mentioned that this girl also had some mental health issues. She was heavily medicated. She had a suicide attempt during our relationship that I had to rush her to the hospital when she was in the hospital overnight. The doctors told me she had overdosed on Benadryl of all things. And I didn't, this was like my first experience with this as well. But anyways.
Right.
Not the shit on her. Like we should focus on why I made the decision. But, during that process, again, I got arrested, processed. At this time, like I had experienced this before, so I knew, listen, it's either like there's two sides again. There's no proof that anything took place. And at this point, I'm going to dig my heels in and I'm going to make sure that I just like go down swinging if I have to. Yeah. So, go through the court process, get a lawyer again. And the lawyer's like, if you just plea out to this. And I'm like, no, dude, I said, I'm here to go to fucking jail if I need to. I don't care. I will not admit to anything I didn't do. And I'm certainly not going to sacrifice the rest of my life for some more decision-making process. Someone especially that's got mental health issues, basically. At that point, digging my heels in was the right thing to do. All of the charges got thrown out. The court ended up deciding that I was instead supposed to go through a court mandated, men's like development program for domestic specifically. And we've talked about this before, but I had a real bad attitude about going into that program. It was a 16-week program. It was, if I didn't do it, they were going to bring the court case back and all this other shit. So I was like, okay, let's do it. So I went in with a shitty attitude. The facilitators were there and I was like spit venom at this facilitators. I shouldn't be here. This isn't my spot, blah, blah, blah. But something happened over the course of the 16-week program where I changed the way I was thinking about it because I could tell I was having a bad attitude about it. I mean, even at whatever age I was in my early 30s. Well, you don't think about yourself necessarily while you're focused on trying to survive and build other things. Everything else in life is going on. You don't necessarily, you're not as effective as you could be. I think I wasn't, at least, in trying to, work on your personal development stuff. So at that time, I take a good look at my life. How did I get in this situation again? And then, readjust my decision-making processes to try and align better outcomes. So I took a little bit of a chill pill in this program. Yeah. To kind of turn it around. And I got to know the guys in there. And through the whole 16-week program, there were guys exiting, right? So, there's probably 20 guys in this group every Tuesday, 2 hours. I got to meet all the guys. I got to learn about all these different situations. And then I kind of put into perspective what was going on in my life, understanding that, although it was a shitty situation for me, it wasn't necessarily the worst thing that I could be involved in. Like, there's a
Right.
lot of horror stories that these guys were telling me that I was like, Jesus, thank God that's not me. But I learned along the way that there are very like different versions of this type of thing taking place all over the place, and ranging anywhere from a guy who clearly, just based on his the way he speaks and his body language and his life situation, is like, you could tell he's not physically beaten necessarily, but beaten down by the system for years and years. It's just like a
Right.
shell of a man. And I'm staring at these guys thinking to myself, who makes these people this way? Like, don't get me wrong, there was some guys in there that I feel like probably had like a nasty, abusive, mean streak, violent. And again, I'm painting a picture that's based on my experience with these guys, but there were guys in there. The majority of the guys in there weren't like me, so they weren't in a situation where they were like, I was wrongly accused, like fuck the system type thing. There were guys that were like, please help me. Like, I don't know how to handle this home situation that I'm in and or this divorce situation that I'm in. And I didn't have experience with kids or divorce or anything like that other than growing up in that environment. So I learned a lot from these guys. And what it did was it drove the point home that this thing probably required a little bit more support in society. Cause I feel like you get the vibe like you're ushered into this cattle chute and you're put under this one umbrella. You're like, oh, you're one of these guys. And I wasn't. And I knew it. And so I thought, I'm going to take advantage of this situation in two ways. I'm going to try and positively affect these guys' lives best I can based on my life specific to the situation. And then when I leave here, I'm going to find a way to do this on a bigger scale. And at that time, struggling entrepreneur, I'm just barely making ends meet, trying to survive, working a bunch of different jobs, trying to run the business on the side. So, I don't have a lot of money to be able to, be in the current position that I'm in, which is I'm fortunate enough to be a donor now. I've got some philanthropic effort that I've been able to develop over the last couple of years based on most recent successes. But at that time, I didn't have the ability to do that. So best way I could affect that situation was go in there with a good attitude, talk to these guys, tell my story and help kind of like draw things out of them, help them think different ways. Just not unlike has happened with you in the last couple of weeks and you've introduced me to. And obviously, plan that, just go in there with the intent to try and help people again.
Right.
And that's what I did. So each of the guys that exited during the 16-week program that I was there probably started within the first 2 weeks. You have to go through kind of a presentation of like a summary of what you've learned throughout the 16-week program. So what you're taking away, what thought processes were when you came in versus how they've changed and what you've progressed through. And each of the individuals that left during their presentation on their exit all said that the most positive impact that had taken place during that program was hearing me speak about my situation, which was the first kind of interaction I'd ever had with other people that had looked at my scenario and gone, oh fuck, like this has been valuable. It's the first kind of like positive feedback I'd received anyone, let alone males that would kind of reinforce that I was headed in the right direction. Never heard anybody speak about me like that before. And it kind of like, it motivated me in a way to try and find more of that. Right? So, I mean, whether that's driven by arrogance, because I want these guys to be impressed about what I say, or whether it's driven by this kind of unknown, which ultimately ended up being that I didn't know why it felt good to get reciprocation like that just based on my scenario, but it was affirming the things that I was saying as, valid and useful and all these other things. So, I mean, ever since then, once I got into a financial situation where I could make a contribution, I set out into the world to try and find programs specifically to support men in those types of scenarios. And there were none. And when I realized how thin the resources were, I looked hard, but I'm like, you look for something you can't have, or there's something that you can't buy, you want it more, right? So when I found nothing, I went like harder in the paint trying to find this. So I reached out to like as many charities as I could. And then I didn't even know how this group ended up coming to me, but it was a friend of a friend, and they had sent me this link, and I looked up the Canadian Center for Men and Families was at the time, it's like 3 years ago,
Yeah.
small organization. To put it in perspective, I think the numbers they gave me for support beds for domestic abuse situations for women in the province of Alberta is like 1,300, something like that. For men, it was two. And having lived the experience of seeing these guys that were certainly in these situations that were in my group, I knew that there was a larger need than just two beds supporting it. And when you look at it on paper, the stigma of domestic abuse, in the year that I got arrested last year, 14,300 domestic calls in Calgary, and the ones that drew charges were 30, I think.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, the sheer volume of something like that happening, and the way that they processed it, the last time I was arrested was the cops just came to the house, and I opened the door, and they're like, "Get your stuff on, we're leaving." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And well, she called, and I'm, "You want to hear what I have to say?" And they're like, "Yeah, we don't care. We have someone to go, and it's you, obviously." And I'm like, "All right, fuck." So, calmly go through the process again. But I mean, it shines a real bright light on the fact that the system is skewed. And, the more we move into this new world and all the shit that's gone over the last 2 or 3 years, I feel like it's getting worse and worse. And you're lucky to be able to have been a large donor to this program, which is now, expanded 100-fold over the last 2 years. They're very thankful for my involvement, but, they also understand that it takes a pretty significant amount of funding to develop a program in any substantial way. So, this is just a fledgling kind of organization at this point right now. Although we've been able to grow it pretty significantly over the last couple of years, I think that this will be something that will continue to be a large need, and I will continue to support that program for as long as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that. Obviously, it's not easy to talk about, so I commend you for that. And there's a lot to unpack there, so I'll try to do my best. I guess starting from the beginning, and then I'll try to work my way through the story. But why was it so important for you to reach out to your father when that whole incident with your mother happened on the phone?
Question.
Yeah. Why was that something that you felt was necessary, and you went through all the efforts? Because it sounds like at that time you weren't really in a stable financial position. So to hire a private investigator and go through that whole process of finding a man that, you really didn't have a relationship with, and you'd also been programmed a certain way to believe certain things about this man. Why was it so important for you?
Great question. The moment at which the communication between the first woman and my mother took place was such a knee-jerk reaction on her part to take the side of the victim in this particular scenario. Then I thought to myself, you know what? If she's not willing to listen to my side of the story, or at least willing to learn about what actually took place from her son's mouth, what took place during the actual, divorce and the breakup during the time kid. And so I became curious about whether or not there was something that I didn't know, right? And I wanted to find out what I didn't know. I certainly wanted to have a conversation with him. So I had lived the years prior to that, without getting into detail, are probably more personal than I should talk about, but the things that were told to us while we were growing up were not good. And I had created this thing in my mind where I was like, if I ever see this guy, I'm going to beat the shit out of him, or I'm going to this, or like I had carried a lot of anger about that situation because it was communicated to me as a child. And I carried that into my 20s and even into my like mid 20s, like a couple of years before I had sought him out. I still had that mentality. So I think it was partly I wanted to process what had taken place with me, but I also was very curious about what had taken place with Gavin. I think he ended up with, I'm very close with him now. We speak on a regular basis. I probably don't see him as much as I should, considering the task with him, but he's retiring this year. So I'm hoping we'll be able to get some more time together. But yeah, that's the reason why I reached out to you, because I wanted to make sure that, I gave myself enough support in trying to hold my ground with what I knew had taken place, although the world is now looking at me, not only girl that happened with, but her friends and my friends start to look at the situation like, oh, maybe it did happen. And I'm like, with like everyone, it seemed like everyone was against me, right? So the only
Right.
person that I'm going to be able to see. So I wanted to
Yeah.
get as much information as I could. And that's kind of what drove the decision.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I know the other piece you mentioned was you started to see a pattern, especially with the women that you were dating. And what I've found is not a lot of people are fortunate enough to recognize that often we continue to repeat the same patterns in our adult relationships that we've carried over from childhood. I've had that experience too, so I can relate. And, I finally recently realized that I was also repeating the same patterns of not having that approval from my mother as a child and seeking that out in partners. And some people never figure that out, unfortunately, and you see that. What was it for you that made you realize that, hey, there's something unhealed from my childhood in terms of the relationship I had with my mother, and I'm continuing to repeat that with my partners? Like, at what point did
Yeah.
you realize that? And maybe you can share a little bit in terms of how you were able to also change those patterns when you met your wife.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I feel like, chronologically, if you look at the first instance to where I actually had the realization and the process of the healing took place was probably almost 15 years. Like
Yeah.
it was almost as long as the time frame that I had not seen my father. And it was a very broken, choppy relationship with my mother. I'd only speak to her maybe once a year, maybe not even on the phone, maybe a text message. So, fast forward to fast track entrepreneur, kind of getting to the precipice of stopping failing and getting to the first success. I had driven very hard for a really long time, and I had sacrificed a lot of, physical aspects of my life, not taking care of my body the best way and working all
Mm.
these long hours or, the nature of the first couple of industries that I was in were, evening type stuff and out and entertainment and after party type stuff. So I had not lived a flippant, unhealthy lifestyle, but certainly wasn't taking care of myself the way that I do now or that I should have.
Yeah.
So ended up resulting in is a pretty significant digestive issues. First manifested as digestive issues, and then I sought out the doctor when it got really bad, and he told me that the stress in my life that I needed to. It seemed too basic to solve the problem for me, so I
Right.
ended up an exorbitant amount of money at the time. I had the ability to be able to do that to try and help doctor, try and get this doctor to help me feel better. And one of the things that I got nothing but bad things to say about this doctor, except for this. He did tell me something that was very valuable in that he said that you need to find a way to process past trauma specific to your family, because the connection to your family is something that is very important. And, the second brain connection, which is your stomach,
Yeah.
is very connected to that portion of how your brain processes your relationship with specifically your mother, but your family in general. So he's
Yeah.
like, if there's some past trauma there and you've had a bad relationship, he's like, I'm not saying this is going to fix everything, but what I'm saying is that, this is going to help things. And I
Mhm.
read a book called The Body Keeps a Score, which basic premise of is, I don't know if you've read it before, but the
Yeah,
basic premise,
we've talked about it many times on this
yeah,
podcast, so I'm glad you mentioned it. But yeah.
it's funny that, just as an aside, as I start to find all these things that you're involved in now, I look back at my life and all the different transition periods and all the things that I learned with no direction and not really knowing that these were tools that were out there. I just kind of stumbled on them. Funny
Yeah.
to see, you were following the breadcrumbs, but you didn't really know they were breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
So I read the book. I made the effort to reach back out to her. I put my ego aside in that scenario because I thought, in all of the past experiences that we've had specific to the first domestic situation,
Yeah.
how fast she changed her opinion. I was of the opinion about my mother that she just had this inability to change. And, the anger, I didn't realize till later, the anger came from her. So my anger came from her. She was a very
Right.
angry person as well. So once I reached back out to her, something cool happened. It didn't happen fast. It happened over a couple of years, but I made the effort against what my previous viewpoints were, meaning, I was arrogant about the fact that she had made the decision to side with this other girl. And, I held her responsible for lying to me about my father growing up and all these other things. But I put all that aside in an effort to try and, fix this stomach issue thing that I had. So I was doing the work. He told me, this is the way you got to do it. Read this book, go through these steps, do this. So I did that. And then as you're starting to reflect on all of those things, you start to reconnect with what ultimately was the genesis of the creation of all of these bad relationships that I had been in. I realized, I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, this is the reason why I saw personalities out. And this is the reason why the relationships ended up, growing the same way, plateauing the same way, and ending the same way. Not all exactly the same, but they're very similar in nature. When you start to kind of take stock of all those, there was probably in a 15 or 20-year period, I probably had, 4 or 5 kind of longer term relationships. And I never really kind of did like a one and done type scenario. It was always like be with a girl, probably about 2 years, 3 years. The longest relationship I've been in, term relationship right now is 8 years. But I mean, again, you even look at the time frames, right? The time frames were accurately similar. And that's when I started to realize, there's some work that needs to get done here, and I'm making bad decisions. So what changed everything for me was the last instance, the arrest, the process, the men's group. I actually met with a friend of hers who, I mean, I don't want to use the word sides, but she's on my side. She was of the opinion that this woman that I was in a relationship did what she did to try and manipulate my past situation to her benefit. She wanted to control all these things. I appreciated her viewpoint because she was understanding of me. She wanted to hear my side, right? She wanted to know what happened. So she gave me a really good piece of advice, and she told me, so basic. And I mean, I don't know why I didn't think of it. She said, write a list of all of the things that you want in a woman. Like, what do you want in your personal relationship? Who do you want to be your partner? Like, just describe, and then put on this side there's no way I'm ever going to be in a relationship with this type of person. And it's funny, when I started to do the exercise, I did it on my cell phone. So I still have the phone with the notes. I'd have to go back and charge it, but I kept it. Within 10 days of like making this list, and not that I was looking for a relationship, but within 10 days of this exercise, I met my current one. We met at the gym. It was a random connection, like just to bump into each other, start talking.
Yeah.
And then what I did after that was I used the list as the template in a way where, I wanted to try and decipher whether or not the new woman that I had just met was what I was looking for. Right. So I used the list religiously. And over time, as I got to know Crystal, I realized that she was all of the things that I wanted and virtually none of the things that I didn't want. So I was like, wow, this exercise worked first. Yeah. And second, it put me in a position where I treated this situation and how we grew as a friend, as like a friendship and a relationship completely different. So, not to get too graphic, but there was no sex for the first month and a half, which was not common. If I had met someone in the past, it probably was far quicker than, mistake. We got to learn about each other differently. I tried to treat the situation almost, I don't want to say the exact opposite, but almost the exact opposite of as I treated any of the other past relationships. Specific to the fact that I had done that work with Body Keeps the Score. It was specific to the fact that I had this experience that was negative again, and I needed to make a conscious effort to try and decide to do things differently. So they were all kind of they all happened at the same time, and it all kind of did righted the ship a little bit, and it allowed me to be able to double down on trying to build a quality relationship with somebody based on, the morals and the ethics of a life that I knew that I had. So it was reciprocated to me in a way that it hadn't been before, ultimately resulting in the best personal relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you mentioned this to me before, but it was really important for you to also be honest with your wife when you met her, right? And why was that so important to be honest about your financial situation, your prior incidents, obviously with the authorities? Why was all that important for you to put it on the table right away up front?
Like I said before, I did that in every personal relationship that I had past the first incident that took place, only because I'm a very transparent person. I
Yeah.
can't like, I mean, I'm sure I could lie. I'm smart enough to lie, but I mean, lying makes me feel, well, even a little white lie. You tell somebody that you don't want to talk to on the phone, and something else. Shit like that just isn't my style. I'm
Right.
pretty, I'm pretty upfront, pretty in your face, which is, something that I love about myself, but not a lot of people necessarily love. So in this current situation, like that new relationship, I felt it important because if I'm going to be with the person, which I don't go into a scenario thinking, oh, this is going to last for 2 months and then we're just going to talk to each other again. I really, at that point in my life, was looking for a partner. And for whatever reason, it's an innate kind of draw to wanting to be with somebody that can support you, that understands who you are as a person, that loves you for who you are, that will
Mhm.
support you on what it is that you're doing in your life. I gave it to her in the first 2 weeks. I was like, listen, I just filed a personal bankruptcy because the last business that I tried to build, this is what my past looks like from a personal relationship standpoint. This is what my
Yep.
situation is. And we're learning about each other. And I feel like all of that information is very important to building like a sound foundation in a new relationship. And I just felt compelled because I want to put the best foot forward in any situation. So, I mean, anybody who wants to talk to me about my life experience in that realm, I'm happy to talk to.
Right.
It's the reason why I enjoy the CCMF. It's the reason why I'm drawn to trying to help men process, trauma and bad life experience and failed relationships and, chase successful entrepreneurial efforts, all these things. It's my lived experience that I think is valuable. And I mean, you know, the, being honest with somebody, I think it's at least you could,
Mhm.
the
Yeah,
least.
yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate that. And going back again to, as you mentioned, the second time you were in a domestic incident, it was very important for you to stick to your truth. And like you mentioned, like when even when dealing with the police, you had to dig your heels in and stand up for yourself. Why was it so important knowing you were kind of against the odds? The situation didn't look bad, look great on you, obviously, because of previous incident. Why was it so important for you to stick up for yourself in that moment? And how did that help you in moving forward?
Good question. I think I probably felt from the first one, when it happened the second time, you start to reflect on the first time
Yeah.
and how I handled the first situation. I thought was true to who I was as a person, but I kind of rolled over and it felt like I made a mistake. And the second time, so there's a time frame between these two, right? It's significant.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly what it was, but during that time frame, because the first charge was on my record, my interactions with Calgary City Police in any scenario, so getting pulled over from like speeding ticket, specific specifically, I was out with a group of friends at a bar one night on 17th Ave. It was hockey time and like Red Mile. I think I might have told you the story, but I'll tell the story again.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I was with some guys I had gone to firefighting school with. Chill dudes, like not crazy partiers. We're just out because of the hockey. And I'm not like a nightclub guy, or I wasn't in my 20s. Not at least I don't think I was. We were at this club and this guy got jumped in the bar, his buddy. As we're all
Yes.
outside the bar now because everyone got removed. And the police were talking to him. One of the bouncers comes over and he tells me, you guys should leave. These guys are looking to arrest somebody, red mob, craziness, whatever. And so
Yeah.
I go over and I know this guy's wife. I'm like, dude, we gotta go. And the cop looks at me and he goes, yeah, you better go. Tough guy. He's like, otherwise you're going to jail. And I just turned around and I looked at the police officer and I said, why you gotta be such a prick? I'm like, we're leaving. And so
Yeah.
as I start walking away, he walks up behind me and closed fist punched me in the back, like just behind the ear, like right in the neck. Two of
Yeah.
them to the ground. I'm now arrested for calling a police officer a prick. They picked me up off the sidewalk. They put me in the paddy wagon. During the process of hammering me in the paddy wagon, they clipped my head off the top of the door and cut me over my eyebrow. So I'm just like pouring blood out of the one eye. I
Yeah.
think left behind my back. I'm in a paddy wagon and I'm like, what the fuck just happened? Like, how? Like, and so take me to the arrest unit. Obviously not a good idea in hindsight, but because the blood was in my eyes, I like had this urge to like wipe the blood out of my eyes. Somehow I managed to get my handcuffs from my back across my feet in front of me so I could wipe the blood out of my eyes in the 5 or 10 minutes it took for them to drive us to the arrest unit. As you could most likely imagine, when the police officers saw that my handcuffs were not behind my back when they opened the door, they did not react positively. So what took place after that was a pretty violent, pretty traumatic 45-minute to 1 hour time frame wherein they handcuffed me to the arrest unit bench inside the downtown police station, and 6 police officers lined up with their little black gloves on and all took turns cracking me in the face. And it was something that I never thought was ever going to happen to me. And you just hear about that type of stuff in movies. And the reason I know the time frame was 45 minutes to an hour is because they have got something outside the arrest unit with a phone call, and there were a group of guys who were waiting in there to get fingerprinted. I didn't see them at the time they saw me. My interaction with the police officers was, non-violent, obviously, because I'm handcuffed to the chair. So I'm not struggling. There's no nothing, but I was like John, right? So the first guy that hit me grabbed me. I had hair at the time, believe it or not. Grabbed me by the hair and cracked me in the face. And, I told the guy, like, you hit like my sister, which I obviously wasn't the right thing to say. So I ended up getting whooped. And they couldn't process me. They had to take me back into the van, take me to the hospital. I got 182 stitches in my face and head due to this beating.
Yeah.
I then was brought back from the hospital, after that and put back through the arrest system and then put into cells. I was brought up on charges of obstruction to, assault with a weapon on a police officer 2, and resisting arrest 2. So 6 charges total, equaling maybe 9 to 12 years of jail, according to what my lawyer had told me. So, I mean, I don't want to say that it was because of what was on my record at the time. Police certainly treated me some kind of way based on, how I looked or how I sounded. Like, it certainly wasn't warranted. Like, there was no real reason for this to happen. It's tough to say what drove that. Again, I'm processing it like, what the fuck did I do? Like, how the fuck did I end up here again? What mistake I make that put me in this situation? And I think it was kind of a combination of, my opinion about Calgary City Police is not a good one. So I think corrupt cops. An interesting story about this that I'll touch on in a second is I was able to revisit meeting with these arrest officers, 10 or 15 years. And, it's a good way for me to process what had taken place, to get past that whole, nervousness around the cops. Like, I tried to put myself in testing situations since then so that I don't feel the way that I did in the past about authority. And even just the most recent thing, like, I got pulled over. This woman pulled me over a couple weeks ago and she goes, well, your license plate doesn't match this vehicle. Well, yes, it does. I said, well, here's my registration. I said, my insurance. I don't understand what the problem is. And now I'm like, back then I was broke guy, working lots, drinking with my buddies, cops are beating me up. Like, there's this history of Calgary City Police. Now I'm, a successful entrepreneur, married for 8 years. I'm driving a almost $200,000 vehicle. This cop pulled me over and I'm still just vibrating. Like, it's this, it's PTSD, but it's this innate kind of like, not hatred, but it's like nervousness of cops, right? Because I can't trust that any scenario that I walk into with law enforcement isn't going to end with me, handcuffs, which is not a realistic way to think about my life now, obviously. But it's still there. And, this thing that happened to me because of the choices that I made, about personal relationships ultimately set the stage for how how I grew as a man for the next 10 or 15 years, how I saw law, how I saw the world, how I saw my personal relationship, many of them. Like it was very formative, and it was formative late in life. Like it still drives my decision-making process now.
Right.
I had the opportunity to go golf in a fancy police association golf tournament this year. And I'm walking around thinking to myself, how would the 25-year-old me think about this? I knew that I was at the Police Youth Foundation golf tournament, hobnobbing with cops. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I had a bad attitude about the police for a really long time. And like I said, the how it was developed was based on that personal relationship. And it's wild to look back at it all now, think about how things rolled out, think about the mistakes that I made, the wrong decisions that I made, and just not unlike business. I failed forward in life because I didn't have a real solid male role model early.
Right.
And, it's nobody's fault. It just is life circumstances, right? And I was
Yeah.
lucky to have a mother that was able to show me, the side, what I would deem as the most valuable thing that I've learned that I could have gotten from my father with work ethic. And I'm lucky enough to have been raised by a woman that was that strong, that worked that hard to help us have a life. And all these things I didn't realize while I'm like 16 to 25 or 27 or even 35 years old. Like it didn't come to me too late. Let's say that I still have time to have a relationship with her. I still have time to relearn the things that I should have learned, fortunate enough to be able to look back at my life experiences and have not gone all the way down a really bad road, right? Like I easily could have ended up in jail. I very easily could have ended up killing somebody. I was in a sport where you're taught how to hurt people. And then early years when I was in martial arts, it was there for discipline. Later in life, as you ego and you grow this more disdain for society and like fuck the police mentality and all this shit, then you become a weapon. Then you're like, who can I hurt? Right. And I mean, it's bad because of the domestic situation, but I fought a lot of guys. Like there were street fights that existed that should not happen. There were scenarios in which I got shit kicked. The cops is a good example. There were scenarios I fought men on the street in, mid early 20s type scenarios after the or during the bar or whatever it was. And it didn't happen all the time, but it happened enough times that I can look back at it and go, Jesus Christ, like I'm lucky I didn't kill someone and or end up dead. I mean, ultimately.
Right.
The good thing to look back at was there was no real heavy substance abuse. I didn't drink a whole bunch. I didn't do drugs at all. In fact, I've only just now recently discovered cannabis, which has been a fantastic addition to my life. But it was later in life, and I think that it's probably the most valuable thing that I've been able to kind of like use as a tool to retrospectively review my life, from a different vantage point. And it's given me a lot of insights as to the mistakes that I've made and the learning lessons that I've gone through as man and what I've still got to do by way of work. Like I said, I'm just, this is early days for me.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for building on that. And I guess the natural question that comes in, I've been fortunate enough to hear the story, which I find is very powerful. Why was it so important for you to reach out to the police, after all those years, after that incident of being beaten down brutally? Why was it important for you to reach out to them and connect and be able to have that opportunity to talk to them and find out what was their intention behind doing all that to you?
Yeah, good question. So I gotta be honest with you. At the very beginning, when I sought these guys out, it was an arrogance thing. So it was kind of a fuck you to these guys because I thought I had just sold my first company. I made a substantial amount of money. I'm living I'm living the life that I know I was meant to live by way of accomplishment and all this kind of stuff. So in a small kind of like fuck you type of way, I wanted these guys to come to my world and see what I had been able to accomplish, despite what had taken place, in those years or in the past. So when I invited, so it was a whole process. So I had to go at the beginning of COVID. So all the police stations were closed.
Yeah.
And try to find a way to get the documents for the arrest so that I could look up the names. So for a lot of years, I had carried the paperwork with me.
Yeah.
I had gone through like different home scenarios. So I had this briefcase and I always kept these papers. It was all these statements from the officers, my statements, all this stuff. I kept it all, and I kept it because I just was seething about the fact that this had taken place and that I was them and all this other shit.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to this, I'd thrown it out. So I had decided I'm going to process this. I'm going to turn the page. I'm not going to focus on this anymore. I'm not going to allow these thought processes to control anything in my life. I don't feel good when I think that way. I feel like something's being taken away from me, right? So I decided to have that. I'd go up and get it again. So I collected the information, reliving, reading all that stuff after years of not kind of having decided to turn the page with that attitude. And just like, it's gross, right? You're reliving a shitty part of your life that you really want to turn the page on. Anyway, so I got the guys' names. They reached out via email. And there were 3 of them and only one responded. One that responded quickly, and I didn't know why until I met him. But I at the time had an office in a motorcycle shop here in town and invited them down to my office. And he didn't know what I wanted to talk about. He was involved in some charity stuff, so I didn't lead him to believe that I would involve myself in charity. What I said was, I'm involved in some charities in the city. I'd like to meet with you. And he's like, oh yeah, no problem. He's like, when would you like to come? So we set it up. He came down a couple of days later, and the time is approaching to when he's going to get there. So I'm like looking out the window. Where is he? Like, this is, to me, I don't know what the fuck's going to happen. I don't know why I'm doing this. Like, maybe it's because I want to process this. I want to close the door. I want to show these guys, fuck you. I became more successful than you ever could hope to be.
Yeah.
And when he got there in a walker and has MS, very, very aggressive MS, to a point where they've taken away his weapon. They put him behind the desk. Essentially, his identity is gone. He told me during our meeting that we were in there for close to 3 hours. In the last 45 minutes is when we discussed my situation with him. But he had told me that his wife is a brain tumor, and all of these things in this guy's life are just like destroyed. Yeah. And I'm listening to this man tell me this story and, how he's coping with it, and he's writing a book and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, I brought this guy here to try and rub his face in my success, and he showed up broken. And now I'm like on the fly, forced to come up with this, like, what am I going to do now? Like, I'm certainly not going to talk shit to this guy. Not that I had intended on doing that in the first place, but you know how dudes are, right? You're like, fuck you. Yeah. You did this to me, I'm going to do this to you, which is a child's way to look at it. But by the end of the conversation, I had offered to help fund the publishing of his book. And I told him, I'd love to do anything I could do to try and make your life a little bit better. And we actually had a heart-to-heart conversation that he brought up when he finally realized who I was. He brought it up and he said, we have a history together. No, I said, yes, we do. And I said, I bring you here. This was at the time that I switched my thought process. Necessarily true, but I'm like, I didn't bring you here for any other reason than to like try and turn the page on this. Secretly, it was my ego in my ear trying to tell me that, the real reason was because I wanted to help somebody, but it was most likely, call it 70-30. I wanted to tell like a big fuck you to this guy. But by the time we finished, that was gone. And I feel like that was part of me processing him coming in there and me turning the page and turning into a different person, like putting that chapter officially behind me. But he actually said the words to me that he was confident that his life situation, was karma for the things that he did while he was a police officer. And for me to hear that, knowing that, I probably wasn't the only one that they did that type of stuff to, it closed that for me. And, he also let me know that the other 2 officers had not done the work and would not have processed this the same way, and not to expect that reaching out, which was fair. I had gotten what I went in looking for, although I didn't know what it was when I went in. I came out knowing exactly what it was, and I got it from this guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what did that mean for you, like moving forward, like having that conversation and whatever type of closure you were able to get? What did that mean for you in that moment and moving forward?
Well, I mean, biggest thing was, every time I'd had an interaction with CPS after that, I think about that moment in time, and I think about these people that I'm discussing, whatever it is that I'm discussing with, if I was speeding or because license plate or whatever it was. And I would treat the situation differently, and it allowed me to be able to be more calm. There wasn't like that lizard brain reaction to being pulled over or to the interaction with the police officer. I saw it differently, which was hugely valuable for me. And then further to that, it taught me a lesson about understanding, a situation like that, in that, he was a certain type of person in a certain type of job, which by the way is super cool. So, I mean, I got a lot of respect.
Right.
The good one out there.
Yeah.
It helped me see it from his side. Although that sounds stupid because at the time, they were aggressive for no reason. They beat me, they wanted to, it's a power trip thing, whatever it was. But I got to look at it from his side, and I got to see what the end result of that was. And it hit home for me hard, because I was like, this guy's just like me. He made some bad fucking decisions in his past, It put him into a scenario where some really shitty shit happened. The only difference between what happened with him and what happened with me is maybe he didn't do the work soon enough. I can't say that obviously he got sick and all these bad things happened in his life because of that. But I mean, it's not a huge stretch to think that if you don't right your ship at some point in time through your life and start making different decisions about what you want your life to look like and what type of man you want to be, you're going to end up in a shitty fucking spot, whether it's health, whether it's, the example of me being an entrepreneur and working too hard and neglecting the health aspect of my life is a good example. Well, different. It's similar. Like you make those decisions and you ignore the things that are important, eventually it's going to catch up.
Right. And I mean, that's a great point. And as we come to a close, I do have a couple of questions that are related and based on your final point. But looking back on your life, the whole journey, right? And we've kind of been able to walk through that journey and obviously not get into details on some stuff, but looking back, is there anything you would change? And I would assume that if you were to change anything, you wouldn't be where you are today, but is there anything that you regret and that you would do differently looking back?
Yeah, I'm sure that there are probably some regrets. Like you said, I don't think that I would change anything necessarily, because I wouldn't have ended up in the exact spot I'm in right now. I'm very happy with the scenario that I'm in right now. So I like it here. I probably wouldn't change it if I was given the opportunity. However, if I had have known, the things I know about how to pick the right partner, I probably would have changed some of those decisions. I would have stayed away from the main drivers at the point at which you're 21 years old, which is, how hot is this chick? All these other things, like how fast, all the infantile decision-making process go through at 21. But I probably would have done it. I mean, how do you change that? Like, and, the life circumstances that I was in, being a fighter, being in that industry, working in construction, working in the oil field, like you're around a lot of less than reputable personal influences, let's say, as maybe being in a corporate setting or being around people that where I have a good group of dudes that are valuable to me that I can draw experience from. Never really had anybody that was older that mentored me. Never really had the opportunity to, based on the fact maybe I thought I didn't have enough experience or whatever it was, to mentor any young guys. But as I get older, I now realize that those are probably some of the most valuable things that I'm going to be able to work on, that are going to allow me to be able to have the most positive effect on the world forward, is, gaining experience from intelligent men that have accomplished things, that have gone through trauma and have suffered through life in general and have learned lessons from those sufferings and have been able to come out the other side a better person and with more valuable ammunition to be able to give to the next guy that may need it. And, up until I met you, and not to pump your tires too much, but I really didn't have a viewpoint that could take a look at my situation, that could challenge me on past decisions that I'd made and force me into these new kind of thought processes that have kind of helped me guide towards what I'm actually here to do. So there has been some pretty significant realizations over the last, 2 or 3 weeks that we've known each other. So I appreciate that from you. And I do really feel like I mentioned it before, but I feel like this might just be the beginning of something much, much larger.
Right. No, and I appreciate you saying that. And And I think part of it is, Steve, that, if you hadn't experienced those relationships, you probably wouldn't appreciate the one you have today, right? And that's just natural. And to be in a position you are in today, and as you mentioned, not having that role model or mentor early on in your life, you can probably pay it forward now for other men. And that leads me into my last question. Like, there's a lot of suffering in this world, that goes without saying. There's a lot of people struggling. Men specifically struggle different things, whether it's divorce or some of the situations you've described. There's a lot of adversity that men create for themselves too. What piece of advice would you offer to someone who's, in their 20s or early 30s and is having this mindset that, oh, maybe the world is out to get me or against me? What would you offer to those men so they can perhaps shift their mindset and look at life differently?
I think that if I had had the opportunity to speak to someone convinced, I would assume it's tough because I think it would be tough. Being 21 years old, it's tough to convince a young guy that he doesn't know everything and that you should probably seek out someone who's got the ability to be able to communicate to you, connect in, the same mentality as what you've got now. And I don't necessarily hang out with a bunch of 21-year-olds, but it's different than it was when I was 20. I would say try to find people that are doing something that you aspire to do. So find almost like a role model. I didn't necessarily have that time because I didn't exactly know what I wanted. I knew I wanted success, or I knew I wanted to do something that would offer me the freedom to live my life the way that I wanted to.
Right.
But back at it now, had I had somebody, like you or like me that had lived through some fucked up shit that could kind of give you like, I'm not saying that my way is the right way, but I'm saying, hey, there's this big hole over here. Like, stay the fuck away from this. This is a thing but destroy your life. But I would say seek somebody that you aspire to be like, and reach out to them. Like, I read those books and everything else through my attempt to become a successful entrepreneur. And a lot of times taking that, I have this note in my phone that says, do one crazy business, and it pops up once a month. And, so whatever it is, I just come up with it on the spot, but reach out to somebody, take a risk to be vulnerable, take a risk to be told no. And, the book Getting to Yes isn't just specific to business, probably very specific to life as well. Go out and fail as many times as you possibly can. Do good. At your core, do good. Try to benefit as many people as you can in whatever way, whatever you're good at, whatever you think that you can excel at. Try and find a way to stay focused on doing the right thing in general. And eventually, you'll find your way. I know that's a very big piece of life, but I mean, had I had someone when I was 21 years old tell me, just find someone to aspire to be like.
Right.
Yeah, probably the best advice. Because then you got not always be the right decision. And that might change a bunch of times, but at least you've got something to focus on. It drives you towards some type of goal. Setting goals for yourself is very important. And I learned that really early on, although they were scattered and not necessarily focused in the right directions. Setting goals for yourself and trying to do as much good as you possibly can. I feel like you've got a compass that's going to point you in the general right direction, and you're going to be able to figure it out. Why?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, for me, I take that as, and personally speaking too, it's benefited me is, and based on everything you said too, is take responsibility for yourself, because it's easy to give that power away and fall victim to circumstances. And I like to say we're part of the cause, not part of the effect. So I think it's having that mindset. I think that's helped me. It sounds like it helped you when you started taking responsibility for yourself. And it's just amazing. And Steve, I want to thank you for coming on here and on this platform and sharing your story with me. I've been fortunate enough to hear it before, but even with the listeners, it means a lot. And I appreciate everything you've shared today.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much. This is cool. Maybe we can do it again. I got so many questions for you. It's good. Thank you very much, man. This is awesome. I'm glad you're doing this. This is important. This is, people in this space, people that want to give back, people that want to help. There's different versions of it. And I feel like your version is different. The Cord's version is different than my version is going to be. Like, I really want to dig into this and make sure that I can learn from what you've done. You can kind of guide me a little bit. I do feel like, the things that I've lived through and the things that I've got experience, whether it was forced or otherwise, can be used. They're valuable. I feel like they're lessons that people should probably know.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that very much, and absolutely. And maybe we can do another episode where you get to ask all the questions. So.
I like that. Awesome.
Thanks. Thank you for checking out this episode with Steve. As always, please leave a 5-star review or a comment in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. And until next week.